welcome to this episode of the Mama Podcast. I'm joined by my host, Marisa Carmel, and today we are joined by the lovely Nikki Wilson from Make Birth Better. We can't wait to hear all about you, Nikki, and the organisation and what you're doing. So tell us all about yourself and what it's like at home for you at the moment.
Well, I was just saying I only got here by the skin of my teeth because it's day 2 back term time. Preschool has begun as his primary. So my middle son forgot his school bag. That's in one direction. Preschool drop-off is in the other direction. And then it turned out the preschool drop-off had changed. So I was in the wrong place. And basically just spent the last half an hour or more running around in the rain, hoping I'm not going to prank my car. It was just a bit crazy. So that's the reality of what it's like at home. So we have 3 kids. Thomas is 10, Matty is 7, Jessie is 3. I would say we're very much in the jungle, as someone said to me once before, in terms of the absolute madness of the logistics and the emotionality of things. So yeah, I'm here. I'm happy to be here. And
You're
also
juggle.
Yeah, really feeling it this morning, but proud that I got here, right? I know this feeling. It's just ironing out the creases, cracks, whatever that phrase is. Give me a couple of weeks and hopefully there'll be a bit more flow. Hopefully.
It's the little wins. We have to cherish the little wins. We have to be proud of ourselves when we get through these moments.
Yes, my husband was like, just call them, tell them you're going to be late. I'm like, I'm not going to be late. I'm going to do this.
Well,
you've got.
Go on.
Sorry, I was just going to say you've got all the ages there, 10, 7, 3. So, I mean, what do you even do at the weekends to occupy all of them?
Yeah. It's quite tricky, the range, but I was saying to a friend, I think I'm in the tail end of a sweet spot. So this summer holidays was probably one of the easiest, in inverted commas, comparatively so far, because the 10-year-old's not quite a teenager and the 3-year-old's not a baby anymore. So, and actually it's the 10-year-old that adores the 3-year-old the most. So that gap that would potentially be the hardest is kind of smoothed over by the fact that Thomas has like utter adoration for his little sister. So it kind of works at the moment, but I think I've probably only got 1 or 2 more years before it all falls apart.
Is that the same for you, Heidi, with Tobiah? Does he have adoration?
None whatsoever, I'm afraid. No, completely inexistent. We went on holiday. We went to Turkey and I didn't see him all week because he just makes friends within minutes and then he's gone. He doesn't want his little sister ruining the fun. There's 3 years between them. And he just sees her as his annoying little sister. So no, they don't get on. They're not friends. But they do have their moments sometimes. Sometimes they'll have a little cuddle. And I try and get the camera out and sneakily have a little snapshot so I can pretend that's reality forever.
More different. My middle one isn't so keen, so they've got 3 years between them, and I think he's just sees her as a bit of a inconvenience, to be honest with you. So yeah, it just varies, doesn't it? You never know what mixture you're going to get.
No, exactly. And it evolves and changes so often. Like my daughter, the youngest one, she used to be quite difficult, shall we say. And my son was the easy one. He was just the dream child. And now suddenly he's hit 13 and this like puberty alarm is going off in the background and he's completely changed. He's a real Kevin. His bedroom's an absolute tip. I can't get him to do what I want him to do, and yet my daughter has also turned the corner and she's a little angel. So it swings and roundabouts all the time at the moment. So tell us about your role in Make Birth Better. How did you get involved and what do you do?
Oh, yeah. So I got involved, see how I can say this in a nutshell. After I had Matty, the middle boy, I decided not to go back to, kind of more formal employment, if you like. I entered the space of maternal wellness, maternal mental health. I set up my own business, which was all about teaching kind of mindfulness to mums in kind of short snippets. And then over the course of just being in the space, I just got to know lots of amazing people working around maternal mental health. And then I basically came to know the two people who had the kind of brainchild for Make Birth Better, Dr. Emma Svanberg and Dr. Rebecca Moore. And my background has been in the third sector, been in the sector since I was kind of university. And there was just this lovely coming together of things. So I had lived experience of postnatal PTSD. Emma and Becca were really passionate about building an organisation that really brought together a collective of parents and professionals to really kind of begin to combat this kind of chronic problem that exists around birth trauma and postnatal PTSD. And really, they were really happy to kind of set it up and come up with the idea. And I was very happy to say, oh, I've done that. And it was hideously undemocratic, basically. That's kind of how it came around. So yeah, I joined more kind of formally, if you like, in 2020, a few months before COVID decided to make itself known. So it's been a bit of a ride, but it's been an amazing 4 years or so, 4 or 5 years that I've been running Make Birth Better.
That sounds great. And before we get on to kind of what Make Birth Better really does, do you mind sharing a bit about your experience as to why you decided to go into maternal mental health work?
Yeah, of course. Interestingly, I've done a psychology degree. I tinkered around with maybe taking on mental health as a profession a lot, but then kept on coming back to the charity sector and staying there instead. But so I've always had the kind of personal interest, personal and kind of academic interest in it. But like Heidi knows, those of us in this space who are leading these organizations tend to be people who have, a burning passion that comes from having had lived experience. So I'm going to swear now. Excuse me. Are we allowed to swear on the podcast?
Yeah.
Okay. I told my work colleagues everything was going to be fine. It's 10 years ago. I was pregnant with Thomas because I was just going to meditate the shit out of it. They were like, cool. None of them had kids, so they didn't know. And let's just say that didn't work. I went through, a really tough labour, as do many, many women and birthing people and their partners in this country. And had a postpartum hemorrhage, which led to, a kind of very quick surgery, and was completely wired. It's very normal to be more vigilant after you've had a baby, but I was especially wired. And basically, I had this experience in hospital a few days after I'd had Thomas, where my milk was coming in. I was being given a blood transfusion. I'd been awake for days. And medically, I still don't know what happened, but it was very profound. So I couldn't move my body. I couldn't open my eyes, but I could just about speak. So I was like semi-conscious. So in my mind's eye, that's what death was. That was like, this is it. I'm tapping out. But what was coming together there wasn't just a belief that I was dying. It was a belief that it was my turn. Because when we were young, I lost my brother to cancer. He was 4 when he died. So we had this like quite complex relationship with death, if you like, my whole life. I'd been through a lot as a kid, quite a lot of first childhood experiences is the kind of fancy phrase for it. But I had no idea that in that moment where I believed it was my turn to tap out, not Andrew's, that could, it was I wasn't actually dying. I still don't know what was happening to me to this day, but some kind of like bodily shutdown, believing that you're dying, whether you're dying or not, was enough to trigger really acute symptoms of postnatal PTSD. And I think what still moves me the most, shocks me the most, is, I would hope it's not the same now, but I fear it really is for so many people. No one had any idea what was wrong with me. I couldn't leave my bedroom without having a panic attack. I couldn't fall asleep without someone holding my hand telling me I wasn't dying. My intrusive thoughts were awful. I was so hypervigilant. Any kind of light or, bright lights were too much. I felt really dissociated. I remember reading a magazine and thinking, I can't even, I felt like someone else was reading the magazine and not me, which is dissociation. Little did I know at the time. And a few years later, to be pretty much, only really by coincidence given a list of the symptoms of PTSD. That moment I can remember again thinking, I won't swear again, but how can this be? How can my symptoms been so neatly fitting into this diagnosis of PTSD, and for nobody, not any healthcare professional or any loved one, to have any idea that this was a thing? So it's this grand old cover-up going on. So really, that's where my passion comes from. And, that's 10 years ago. I've done a lot of work to get to where I am today. And when I started running Make Birth Better, I actually didn't know if I'd be able to do it, because I didn't know whether I could sit among so many difficult stories and for my nervous system to let me stay there. But actually, has been the best feedback loop for me around strength, because I was healing and I was actually stronger than I thought I was. And whilst it has its moments still now, it's been amazing, and probably the best job I've ever had, I would say.
It's amazing, isn't it, how PTSD can still to this day have a real sort of taboo around it. And again, there's not much awareness of it and what can be done, because I imagine there's quite a lot of support out there. You've obviously been on a real journey to heal from it, and to really, recognize what it is. What was it that made you realize, okay, this must be PTSD? What were the symptoms that obviously you could relate to when the light bulb moment went off and thought, right, okay, this is what I'm suffering from. Now I might be able to get some help for this.
Yeah, well, it was all very intertwined. So by accident, my mum, bless her, she loves Radio 4. You could paint your own picture of her from that. She listens to the Archers. She heard she heard something on Woman's Hour, actually from Professor Susan Ayres, who we now work really closely with, who's one of the most kind of prolific researchers around birth trauma, talking about symptoms of birth trauma. My mum said, I think this is going to be really hard for you to listen to, Nikki, but I think you need to listen. Like, she was awesome, but like, this is a thing. It's a thing. So I did, and through that actually emailed Susan, got to know the Birth Trauma Association, and one of the other organisations who work tirelessly in this space, and through that found a therapist. At that time, in my professional capacity, I could afford that. Probably couldn't afford that now, but she basically, it was the therapist that gave me this list of symptoms. And I won't do a very good job here because I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but the things that were on there were things like any kind of flashbacks or reminders of the scenario, which will really either take you back or evoke a very physical response. So, for example, I couldn't drive down the road back to the birth centre. Physically, my whole body wouldn't let me to turn around. I found it very, very hard to go back to hospital in any capacity. Whenever anyone spoke about birth, I felt my whole body just tighten. It's that threat response. Basically, you get stuck in your fight, flight, freeze response, even though the threat's not there anymore. You often suffer from hypervigilance. So sometimes people, will probably mistakenly say it was just anxiety. It's just anxiety, but it's very similar to anxiety, but you basically feel like you're not safe in the world. There's too much buzz, noise, stimulation, and you have a fundamental sense that, yeah, you're probably not safe. Avoidance is really a big part of it too. So you might avoid pregnant friends, you might avoid those conversations, you might avoid any manner of things that remind you of your difficult experience. You might not want to have another child again, for example. It's very common after birth trauma. And then the negative thoughts and feelings. So again, that's often where people land, is with a diagnosis of postnatal depression. But in some of those cases, it will have been the trauma story that came first, and negative thoughts and feelings, intense feelings of guilt, shame, are very common. They are one of the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. So yeah, for me, that was intense intrusive thoughts, but intense fear of harming my baby, myself, by accident, or dare I say even on purpose. Thoughts that are not uncommon, but again, something that we don't talk about. So that it was all of those types of things being described on this piece of paper. And I was like, I can't believe this. I cannot believe this. I felt I'd been part of some grand old cover up.
It must have felt like some validation for you as well.
Oh, yeah, massively. Yeah.
I think,
yes.
and unless you've had kind of mental health issues, you can't possibly understand how it can be like so far reaching, some of the thoughts you can have, and so like, bizarre if you've never felt it before. Are there some people that are more likely to be affected than others, or can it just literally, yeah. I mean, I suppose it can happen to anyone, but
it can happen to anyone on the basis that, our trauma response lives in all humans. It is really strip away everything, strip away race, economic status, whatever your privilege might be. It's back to the basics of being a human. Humans are primed to search for safety signals. If they experience something that makes them feel fundamentally unsafe, either in an individual or across a series of circumstances, it is likely that their body in some way will evoke its trauma response. So yes, anyone can be affected. However, the more you have been marginalized by our society, the more you have been told on repeat that there's something wrong with you, that you don't fit, you've been othered, the more likely it is that you will experience birth trauma. And that's really, really important. So normally when I would present on my story, at this point, I would put up a slide, for example, perhaps the Wheel of Power and Privilege, which is worth Googling. If you've not seen it, Sylvia Duckworth. But it's really important that, like with any condition, there's no excuse not to focus on the people who are most likely to be affected first, like we do in any physical area of physical health. And we know that if you are racially minoritized, if you're from the LGBT community, if you are neurodivergent, if you have a history of mental health issues, adverse childhood experiences, a history of loss, the list goes on. We know what the predictive factors are that make you more susceptible to being affected by birth trauma. And that's part of the work that we want to do, is to make people aware. It's not that we mustn't scare them. It's let's educate everyone that anyone can be affected by this, and actually they haven't done anything wrong if they are affected. This is a perfectly normal physical and mental response to a very distressing experience.
And can this affect people a lot later on? And some it can sort of start to come out straight away, and others it can take years. I'm just thinking about myself personally, more recently, and this is 15 years on from when I lost my son. Little things have been happening to me that have come out of nowhere that have really triggered an intense panic attack that I was not expecting whatsoever. I had to go in for an ultrasound on my shoulder, and just going into this room that was all set up like it would be in a pregnancy. I mean, that's the only other time I've been in a sonography room, if you like. I had to get on the bed, and obviously they put the gel on my shoulder, and I had to look at the screen to watch them putting the needle in on the screen. And yeah, all of a sudden I was in pieces. And I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't breathe. And my instinct was to ask this doctor for a midwife. I was like, can I speak to her?
Yes. Yeah.
And I just sat there coping with this panic attack, because I thought, you can't say that to him. He'll think I'm an absolute lunatic. And another thing was, recently I went to a funeral, and obviously I have been to a few funerals in the past 15 years, but I didn't realise that I'd been to funerals in a different location. So I walked into Woking crematorium, and again, I was outside chatting to my mum and my sister, didn't think anything of it. But as soon as I walked in those doors, the last time I was standing there was at my son's funeral. It was the same, venue. And again, my body just shut down. All these feelings that I felt 15 years ago just overwhelmed me. And I felt trapped, and I was trying to find the exit, and you don't want to make a fuss, because you're at somebody else's funeral. You can't make a fuss, and it's not about me. I don't want any attention from me. It was really bizarre. So I think some things can trigger different experiences and traumas off when you're least expecting it, can't it? But I guess there must be lots of support out there for when this happens, so we can help prepare ourselves. Where would people go to for support?
Yeah, thank you for sharing those, Heidi. That was that is going to resonate for so many people, because it really does. Often, for some cases, it builds over time, and for people that are not given enough kind of therapeutic support throughout their traumatic journey, they're more likely to be triggered when something feels the same. So if it feels the same, often in your whole sense of the situation is the same, you go back down that kind of trauma kind of hole, if you like. And that's a lot to do with, it's thought about the way those memories are stored. They're stored in a different part of your brain. They're different to your normal memories. So the reason that can happen, and it is a very real experience where it does, the theory is it's because they're those memories are stored in your fear center. They're not filed away. So when something feels really the same, those memories come back, and they're really pertinent, and they flood. You get that flooding, and you absolutely feel like you're back there, and your very natural instinct is to panic. So that's about that's where one of the ways in which support can help. So if you get to a point where you're able to have that therapy, or often it is this trauma focused CBT, or EMDR is another type of therapy, where you safely go back and revisit those memories, and part of that process is about helping them to be filed away in the right place, so that you don't get over time such a physical reaction to those scenarios. I had the same. I thought, and I had my third. I thought, I've worked for Make Birth Better now. I've really done much better in this pregnancy. And they wheeled me into the room where I'd had Thomas, where I'd had my experience those 7 years before. And it took a few hours for it to fully sink in, but all the symptoms came back within a matter of hours. It was all the same. I was dissociating, I was panicking, it was hypervigilant. It's all the same, because it was the same room, because everything, my body and my brain couldn't figure out that it wasn't the same. It wasn't happening again.
That's so interesting. So it must be
so
quite
interesting,
common for people.
Yes, it's so
feel
common.
like that.
Yeah, and whether that's birth or another distressing experience they've been through. And I guess that's what I'm talking about in terms of, this is a very human, it's part of the way our brain and our bodies work. It's normal, and it's not nice, and we can get help. So in terms of help and support, I'd really direct people to look at our website around this and our support resources, because we've got, a video really talking people through all the different ways that there are to find support, because it's quite complex, like anything, in terms of navigating the NHS for support. Yes, there is support available, but it does help if you can go into GPs, for example, and mention the services that you need to access. So that, you might get some good support from NHS talking therapies. It depends how good that is in your local area. You could be referred onto your maternal mental health service or perinatal mental health team. Unfortunately, often there is a list of criteria that dictate whether you'd be allowed. So Heidi, potentially they would say no to you because your loss was X number of years ago and you're functioning in your daily life, which is really sad that people don't get that support from our health service. There are, of course, a multitude of ways, like anything in this world, where you can pay for therapy and support. There are also peer support groups. And in fact, yesterday I was reading something from one of our supporters, and she was talking about her story and how, I think she was about a year on, maybe 9 months on, and she was on Google and she found our website, and that was the beginning for her of beginning to have that validation, that understanding, figuring out the support she needed, coming on board, becoming a champion for our work. And I can't say enough, for people often say to us in training, but what can we don't know what to do if there's no service. It's better not to say anything, because if we ask them, there's nowhere to send them. And I say, but I'm standing here right in front of you, and I can give you a list of amazing organisations. And yes, perhaps they may not be able to fund the therapy that person really needs, but I promise you, validation alone is an incredibly healing part of anyone's journey. So it is about getting out there, and whether you're ready to talk to peers or not, understanding that there's nothing wrong with you, you've done nothing wrong, and that you are not the first person to experience this.
Absolutely.
So, or probably not the last either. Yeah,
absolutely. Well, I will grab that list from you, Nikki, and we'll put that on the website. We have a mama maternity directory on our website now. So that's got all the talking therapies on, that's got peer-to-peer support services. It has mental health services on there. So hopefully that will be a help to other people. How does this link to other mental health conditions?
Yeah. So, caveat, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist, but we do very much kind of led by that level of expertise as an organisation. So I've learned a lot from them. So what I have learned is that it's not uncommon for people to develop symptoms as well of OCD or depression or anxiety. Comorbid is the fancy phrase that they use, but basically it's very common for a lot of conditions to exist together. But like I said earlier, there's nearly always a trigger point. There's often, not always, but there's often a story, and often a trauma story, that has begun, laid down some of these pathways that make someone more likely to experience symptoms of anxiety, depression, or OCD, for example. So it's all very intertwined. Hence why some people don't like the labels, and I get that. In terms of, to what extent do we help ourselves in trying to differentiate between these different diagnoses? I don't have an answer to that question. I think it depends how neatly your symptoms probably fit into the symptoms that are being presented in front of you. But yeah, it's very common for it all to be very, very intertwined. And as I said, if someone has a history of any kind of struggle around their mental health, it's more likely that this could be a struggle for them too. So it's certainly one to be aware of.
Thank you. And can you tell us a bit more? So what does Make Birth Better do?
Yeah.
How do you help people?
How do we help people? It's a good question. So Make Birth Better, I guess we're very kind of grassroots in the way we began. Emma and Becca, who I mentioned earlier, they ran a series of workshops around the country with us, with parents and professionals, kind of looking at the themes around birth trauma. And one of the big themes was this kind of really strong desire to make birth better. So that's where the name was born. And there really is a fire and a passion around this space. I'm sure you feel it when you speak to others, and possibly have it in yourselves too. It's such a profound experience, isn't it, becoming a parent?
Yes.
Parent. But what we've got clearer and clearer about what we do. We're a unique collective of parents and professionals, and we really do work together to provide support. So we provide a lot of evidence-based online support for parents and for professionals. We do a lot of really good signposting, because, like we just said, often things are very intertwined. There are a lot of amazing organisations like Mama Academy and many others out there providing support that might be just a bit more specialised for your experience that you've been through. So we do a lot of signposting people. And we put a lot of content out there online through various mediums. We then do a lot of training, which is one of our favourite things to do, because in terms of systemic change, you get that double whammy of being able to really begin to change professionals and their approach and their understanding of this, whilst also raising some money. So that's a very helpful way for us to be working to. We absolutely love our training. And then we do a lot of campaigning work, both grassroots and political lobbying, to just really essentially raise awareness and hopefully drive change in terms of our healthcare and our government and their policies and approaches to birth trauma.
Sounds amazing. You're doing incredible work. You really are. And off the back of that, I know that you've recently been really involved with the public inquiry into birth trauma. What are the main focuses of that report?
So that report, you can Google it if you haven't heard of it. It comes up quite high, which is brilliant. So there were a number of recommendations in that report. There was 28 in total. And they were built upon, they came from the themes that came from the submissions that had come largely from parents, about 1,200 submissions from parents telling their stories around birth trauma, as well as about 100 professionals, but much more weighted towards parents, I would say. And there were a lot of themes, rather than go through the recommendations specifically, but there were a lot of kind of themes: a failure to listen, lack of informed consent, poor communication, lack of pain relief, breastfeeding challenges, lack of kindness, postnatal care, impact of COVID, complaints and medical negligence. And those are themes that really do reflect many of the causes of birth trauma. And the recommendations that were put out there included a lot of things that, as an organisation, we really support: improved training of professionals, improved support for our professionals as well. There's a whole, we could do another podcast where we could really, I'm not suggesting we do, but I'm saying that there is another whole topic to discuss here about how intertwined this is with the fact that our healthcare systems are chronically underfunded, that our midwives are really burnt out. Is absolutely contributing to the problem of birth trauma. But there were other recommendations in there about screening, about our maternal mental health services, about our birth listening services, about partners, about interpreters, about trauma-informed antenatal education. So it's a long read, but it's also a very harrowing read, and not one that I suggest that if any of this feels triggering, that you necessarily just pick up without any thought or support, because a lot of those stories are stories that are hard to forget.
Thank you. Sounds like a step in the right direction. If there was one thing that you could change tomorrow to make birth better, what would it be? I'll put you on the spot.
Someone did this to me on Monday as well. There was a panel of 5 people and I got to go 5th, so I didn't know whether that was helpful or not. One thing. Okay. I think at this stage, the one thing I would still say is, in the same, we put something out recently about Davina and what she's done for the menopause. And if there was one thing that we could change, it would be for birth trauma to become as normalized as conversations have become or are becoming around things like the menopause. There is no reason as strong, wonderful women and birthing people that we cannot have really honest, authentic chats about this, that it's just part of our understanding of what can happen, and that we learn about how we can prevent it, and that it becomes a conversation. Someone said to me not that long ago, this feels a bit like it's the kind of one of the world's best kept secrets, and I was like, yeah, it is, turns out, because we somehow told ourselves we can't scare these women and birthing people, and that is a valid fear, but I think we are ready now in this day and age to start having those open conversations like we are about all types of mental health. So
absolutely, you're doing such an incredible job, Nikki. I just love it, and I totally agree. It's about getting the balance right, isn't it? We can't make a difference and we can't make birth better unless we talk about what the problems are. And so that's why we do so much awareness raising in the right context, so that we can empower people, and not just empower the parents, but to empower the healthcare professionals to help make birth better. I could talk to you for hours and hours. I can't believe how quickly
it go quick, didn't it?
Gone, because I've got so many other questions for you, and so many different ways in which we can get involved, because we've been speaking to so many different people about this topic, and we know that we're all going to come together as organisations to get the APPG back up and running again, for when the next government is fully in place, which is really exciting. There's so much work to be done, but we're all here ready to take it on, which I love. I love your passion, Nikki, and I definitely think that there's a future podcast in the making. Definitely, I'm going to get you back into the diary straight away. Unfortunately, sorry about that. You got to rearrange.
Bring a midwife. I could bring with me. I would love to bring with me one of our supporters who is a midwife or a mental health professional who can just really talk to this. In fact, I know exactly who it would be. Could just really talk to this other side of the coin, and we shouldn't even see them as two separate sides, but there is a huge and really important story here about our healthcare professionals, and they're not being looked after, and them not being able to provide the care, love, support that they want to women and birthing people in our system. And it's certainly something we shouldn't forget. And the blame game is a dangerous thing if we start pitching our parents and professionals against one another, because most often our professionals are also parents as well. So it's a bit of a false division, if you know what I mean. Definitely. But no, book me in, or I'll find someone else to talk about it next time.
That'd be fantastic. That'd be wonderful. It's on the Mama agenda. We were talking about this at our AGM a couple of weeks ago, just about how we can support the healthcare professionals, help them in their working environment, help them work together, to improve staff attainment. So we're definitely up for that piece of work. So yeah, let's get that podcast in on that particular topic. But thank you so much for your time today, Nikki. How can people get involved and get hold of you if they need to?
So Instagram at birthbetter. Our website is makebirthbetter.org. And if you're really keen on this stuff, then join us as a volunteer champion. We've got over 200 volunteers out there giving their time and passion to help us make birth better. It's not to be as big or small as a job as you want it to be, but it can be a nice way to help people feel that they're part of the change that needs to happen. So yeah, come on board.
That's incredible. Thank you so much. We will see you again very soon.
Thank you. Thanks both of you. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.